What's up, nerds? It's Rick Swift, and I'm joined by my lovely wife,
Madison Swift.
And this is the Film Grouch Show. So, this episode we are doing a he pick, and it is 1993's Tombstone.
In Tombstone, crime ruled the streets. Violence stalked the innocent. And every stranger was your enemy. Until Wyatt Earp and his brothers arrived. And now, all hell is about to break loose. Kurt Russell, Val Kilmer, Bill Paxton, Jason Priestley, Sam Elliott, Dana Delaney, Michael Bean, Powers Booth, Charlton Heston.
You gonna do something or just stand there and bleed?
Justice is coming to Tombstone.
Which, if you were listening to the last episode, I mentioned that at Weapons Battalion in Paris Island, you were forbidden from quoting that movie on the rifle range because it was quoted so many times. It finally got, they had to put the kibosh on it or whatever. They had to say, stop doing lines from Tombstone. Also Sniper, but nobody guessed Sniper, so that's okay. But anyway, so this is my he pick, and the reason I picked this is because I'm trying to be nice to Madison, because our new rule that she came up with is that we have to have all of our picks be in line with the previous movie. So, for example, you either have to have actors in common with the previous movie, director, producer, writer. It has to be like one of the big people. It can't be like, a key grip or anything like Best Boy or whatever that is. So we just got back from California from my red carpet screening for Tango Down, and so we had our little California adventure. So I guess it's kind of appropriate that we are doing this. Also, October 26th is when the actual gunfight at the OK Corral took place. So pretty topical because we're actually recording this a few days after that.
It's Halloween.
It is Halloween. I didn't want to tell everybody we're hiding in the room. We turned off all the lights and we're hiding because our neighborhood is like, it's like every once in a while we'll get like one or two kids, and it's gotten to the point where it's easier just to like hide and shame and podcast for our lovely fans. So that's what we're doing. So anyway, the reason I said I was being kind to Madison is because this has a ton of people. A ton of actors in it. Kurt Russell, Sam Elliott, Bill Paxton, Dana Delaney, Jason Priestley's in it for crying out loud, Billy Zane. So I figured I'd get her a movie that would be able to start us on the ball right, So without further ado, if you're not familiar with Tombstone, it is about the famous fight at the OK Corral, the gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona territory, with the Earps and the Clantons and Doc Holliday and all that good stuff. This is probably one of the best performances that you will ever see from Val Kilmer ever. I think the other movie that he was really good in was a movie called Spartan, which is a pretty obscure movie, but I really enjoyed it, about a CIA training special forces. I'm going to let Madison take the brunt of this because this was a movie that I picked for her to watch. And she said she had a ton of questions as we were watching the movie, and I'm like, that's awesome because I think it's interesting what her perspective will be for this total guy movie, this total, macho guy movie about gunfights in the Old West. So take it away, Madison.
All right, well, the first thing I wrote down was, I think this is a boring Western. Z. My next question was...
That's not a question.
That was a statement. Okay, my first question. Where is Clint Eastwood, and when is the scene from the Great Movie Ride?
Ah, yes. So the Great Movie Ride, We'll Forever Lament. Yes, one of her favorite rides of all time. There's a scene where she's pretty sure they show a scene from this movie, but she wasn't sure. So did you do some research on that and find out?
No, all Westerns are the same to me.
Oh, okay. So you didn't research it and find out. So maybe we'll add that in the notes. Maybe I'll make you do that afterwards. What
So
was your question?
apparently Clint Eastwood was not in this movie.
No, I don't think he had anything at all to do with this movie, actually, which is kind of interesting.
I thought he had to be in all Western movies.
No, I think Unforgiven came out right before this, though, and that was kind of the modern Western where he was almost making amends, I guess, for some of his older, cheesier Westerns, and was trying to give like more gravitas to the lethality of the Old West, which I really liked about this movie because one of the things that the director said that made him interested about doing this movie was the fact that the gunfight at the OK Corral isn't the beginning of the movie and it isn't the end of the movie. It's like the middle of the movie. It's like it's not really everybody wants that. And
Yeah.
everybody thinks that that's gonna be the culmination of the movie, but it's not really.
No.
That's just a part of what happens. It's
The
not.
second act.
Yeah, it's actually the second act. So what else do you have?
When is something going to happen?
When is something gonna happen? That's what you have in your notes.
Yeah.
Did anything happen?
Yeah.
What happened?
The fight at the OK Corral.
That's it. That's like it was an hour into the movie, and then it was the gunfight at the OK Corral, and that's it.
Other stuff happened. That was early on.
Well, apparently they fired the original director because he was going to make an epic, like 4-hour long movie about all of the major characters, like Billy Brocious. That's the guy who's like, well, bye, Powers Booth.
Yes.
They were going to do more about the Clantons and Ike. And Ike Clanton has got to be the biggest bitch in the American West,
Wasn't
right?
he the one that started it all?
Yeah. Yeah. I can't think of the guy who played him. The guy from Avatar. He was drunk on set the whole time too, they said. But yeah, he was terrible. So I guess he was probably doing like method acting because he was just like this loud-mouthed, drunk jackass who's just constantly trying to start fights with everybody. And then finally, when he's at the gunfight, he doesn't have his gun, and he's like, "I ain't got no gun. I ain't got no gun." And Wyatt says something like, "Well, get away, because kind of that's what we're doing here. We're killing people."
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting if you look at the OK Corral. The gunfight itself was actually 30 seconds long. About 30 bullets were fired in 30 seconds, and they were about 6 feet apart from each other, which is pretty standard for how a real gun battle goes down, even by today's standards, to be quite honest.
Okay.
So that is what happens, but there's a lot more that happens before that, wouldn't you say? They set everything up.
Oh, yes. There's this new lady in town, and she comes in town. She's a performer,
Yes.
and
She's an actress.
She's an actress, and she's traveling with this guy. I think he's her brother, or maybe just her really good friend or something.
Yeah, he's just the partner in the play. He's just like the traveling, minstrel, like a wandering minstrel kind of person who's like with her and her acting troupe, I guess you would say.
Yes.
And that's Billy Zane.
They are new in town, and Wyatt Earp, who is played by Kurt Russell, that's how the movie starts. He comes to town on a train.
Yes, oddly enough, I read that the train that he comes in is 5150, which is, I guess, the LA County code for like losing your shit.
Yes.
Like being crazy. And then at the end, towards the end, when everybody's leaving on the train, and he says, "You tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me."
Yes.
It's also 5150. So
Yes.
people have made comments about that. So it's like the crazy train. So I was like, oh, it's like Ozzy Osbourne. That'd
Yes.
be cool. This would probably be one of those movies that I wouldn't hate if they had like modern music playing in some of the scenes, like Metallica or Ozzy and Guns N' Roses. Guns N' Roses would be kind of appropriate, actually. So like that, like the lead up is the Earps getting into Tombstone.
Right, because he has a brother.
Right, and they're going to basically kind of just set up shop, and he doesn't want anything to do with law enforcement because he was
No, he's
law
retired.
enforcement in Dodge City, and he never even really did much when he was over there. He's just kind of got this legend, and it's similar to Braveheart, where he's living up to this legend that people think that he's a certain way, and he's kind of not. But he's no shrinking violet. He's no pansy, that's for sure. He knows that he's a badass. Like, and I've done some research, and apparently Wyatt Earp really was like a no shit kind of guy. Like the scene where he confronts Billy Bob Thornton, and Billy Bob Thornton's like basically set up shop in this casino, and he's running out all the business because he's just an asshole, and he's constantly picking fights with people and stuff like that. So Wyatt basically walks in and says, "You're in my seat."
Yes.
You know, like, and he's like, oh, excuse me? And then he's like, basically slaps him and says, well, come on, bitch, what are you going to do? Like, you better do something because I'm standing in front of you. And then he's like, here, take my gun. And he can't even do anything with the gun because, you know, Wyatt Earp is just an ultimate badass.
So a couple of times I had a hard time understanding what they were saying because I don't speak Western man.
Yeah. You don't speak Western, man.
Yeah.
That's a good way of saying it.
Yeah. And then at one point I started thinking, would I be able to live in this time and place? Like, would I be able to survive there? And I thought it would be a lot simpler, but a lot less comfy. But then I realized there would be no air conditioning, so I realized, no, I couldn't live there.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, okay, speaking of living back in those times, Doc Holliday was born in Georgia, and his mom died when he was 15 of tuberculosis. During that time, he was helping her. So he was trying to, like, you know, like nurse her back to health or whatever, and she was contagious, and that's how he got his tuberculosis when he was 21. So he had just gone through all this training to become a doctor of dentistry. So he was an actual doctor, and he ended up getting tuberculosis right after he opened up his practice. And he was kind of like, well, I'll move to the Southwest and become a gambler, because that was actually, at the time, considered like a normal thing. It wasn't like, you know, a gambler as a profession is kind of a weird thing by today's standards, but I guess there's plenty of people that do it in Vegas. Look at that guy on Jeopardy.
Yes.
Technically, he's a professional gambler and did pretty well for himself.
Yep.
So Doc Holliday is kind of like, and we'll get into that when we talk about the end of the movie, but he's pretty much like a daredevil. Like, he's kind of not afraid of what's coming because anything is better than dying of tuberculosis.
He's definitely not a pansy.
Definitely not a pansy. Or a daisy.
No, or a shrinking violet.
Yeah.
Wyatt Earp, played by Kurt Russell, who looked good in the movie. I was wondering how old he was there, and I didn't really look it up.
No, he's probably in his 40s.
Yeah, probably.
And again, he looks like Wyatt Earp. I've seen pictures of Wyatt Earp. He looks like Wyatt Earp.
Yeah.
Unlike Kevin
Costner.
Ugh.
So Wyatt Earp and his lady, couldn't really tell if they were married or not. It was just
Common law.
Yeah, okay. And
living in sin, they were.
Oh dear. And then his brother Virgil Earp, played by the ranch's Sam Elliott, because that's how I know him from the ranch.
Yes, he's kind of always Sam Elliott. You know, he's Hey
Yeah.
Mijo from Roadhouse and
Yes.
The Ranch and
Yes.
this and pretty much every movie. There was one. He was on Parks and Rec where he
Yes.
plays like this weird hippie,
An
and I'm
earthy,
like,
crunchy guy.
and I'm like, no.
Yeah,
No,
that was
That is
weird.
not Sam Elliott. You get that guy, and I think he had no mustache even. He looked just
and he wore sandals.
get him out of there. Just get him out
It
of
was
there.
nasty.
I'm like, that's Virgil Earp. That's the rancher. No, you get him out of there.
So Virgil and his lady, and Doc Holliday and his lady, so they all set up shop in this town.
Yes. Well, they basically they without being like dicks about it, they basically take over that casino.
Yes.
He takes a cut of the profits to do protection, which is kind of a gangster thing to do.
Yeah, that's
but
what the mob does.
when you consider that the other guy was doing the same thing,
Yes.
but he was kind of just running. He wasn't being good for business. Right? He was being bad for business. So the actual owner of the place is like, well, you're the devil that I know, that kind of thing. It's like, but this is a guy who's gonna take probably less per percent and actually give me business. But yeah.
So Wyatt Earp's lady, I refer to her as the lady with the long curls. I noticed that she had a drug problem.
Oh yeah, she had opium problem.
Yeah, she kept asking for drugs, and so she was heavy with the drugs.
Was this the movie where there were like no Chinese or something like that, or they're running out the Chinese? Or there's some kind of overt racism about the Chinese. Well, the opium dens were predominantly run by the Chinese, so they were kind of.
Mm-hmm.
It was this weird kind of, well, they give us our drugs, but we hate them because they give us our drugs, kind of thing.
I don't remember that. Maybe I was spacing off. I don't know.
You might have been, but at least you are awake the entire time, unlike other people that I know that do podcasts.
I was awake when I had mentioned earlier that there's a new actress that came into town with her partner. I refer to her as the new floozy in town because she kept asking about Wyatt Earp, even though he had his common law wife, and then they kept making eyes at each other. And one time they ran into each other while they were riding horses in a field. And they had this very inappropriate scene that made me feel very uncomfortable because they had a picnic. And I was thinking, Well, damn, if my husband had a picnic with some floozy, I would be pissed.
Yeah, you'd be really pissed. And they were talking about how the mare was in heat and that they had
Yes!
to run the stallion and the mare had to run it
It was
out.
so
It's like,
inappropriate.
oh, they got to work this out, you
It
know?
made
'cause
me feel very uncomfortable.
very squishy.
Just very uncomfortable.
So I found out that they actually had a scene that they cut after that. Because remember I said, oh, well, they never actually had sex, so I guess he technically never officially cheated on his wife. Well,
but in the
apparently the cut scene they did right after that horse scene, which makes complete sense because they're riding horses that are in heat and they're on a picnic and they're out in the middle of nowhere. And, you know, they're probably going to do stuff. So they did do stuff, but it was off. They cut that scene. So it didn't happen. I guess it's not canon. It's not canon. It didn't happen.
So it was shortly after that long curls moved from laudanum to opium.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think it was related. I don't think she knew about floozy lady making eyes at her man.
I think she was just sick and tired of, like you were just saying, how you would never be able to live in the West. I think that would have, like, not to be mean to you or anything, but you'd probably be, that's like taking Advil all the time. Like taking, how we take Excedrin all the time, but we don't like take it to the point where we can't function as humans. Right. And I think if we lived back in those times, we probably would have just been like, just put me out to the pasture and
just shoot me.
Shoot me. Because it sucks to be out here. I always think, when I saw Tombstone, I thought the same thing. I think I would have been probably some kind of like marshal, but not like a full-time sheriff. Like I probably would have been working in the town, almost like a volunteer fireman, kind of like that's what they had, the deputy marshal. Like I probably would have done stuff like that. But I wouldn't have gone looking for trouble, but if trouble came to find me, I wouldn't have been a pansy about it. I would have been like, oh, I have my gun, and I'm going to do what I got to do. Which is interesting when we get into guns. We'll get into guns and when we get to the OK Corral.
At one point, I don't remember who, but two people had a Latin word off, and it was really weird.
Well, we did a whole bit about that on Face Kevlar. We did a commercial for Tactical Girl for Face Kevlar, where we did a parody of that scene. And our characters were insulting each other in Latin and stuff like that, and it was a takeoff on that. So in Latin, they were basically just saying stuff like, almost like what he says to him at the end when he's like, you know, I'm your Huckleberry, you're Daisy if you do, like you look like somebody walked on your grave. It's kind of like they're both educated people. I love that. I like when he says, oh, apparently he's an educated man. Now I really hate him. Yes. Because it's almost like Doc Holliday's over here because he's got tuberculosis and he's like he's done, right? He put all this time and money into becoming a doctor, and then he did, and then he's like, well, shit, I'm gonna die anyway. Mm-hmm. And then he has this other guy who's in perfect physical health, and he's educated, he's a smart guy, and he's running around doing all this shit. So he's kind of, well, what's your excuse? Why are you out here being a dumbass? And yeah, Johnny Ringo apparently was a real person. I thought he was made up like a composite for the movie. All these people were real people. They were like not composites, which I thought was interesting. Also, the very opening scene where you see the cowboy shooting at the screen, that's from an old 1903 movie called The Great Train Robbery. And it was so effective back when it opened up that people were like freaked out, like they thought they were actually getting shot. That's like the special effects, like the T2 of their time, you know. Yes. But yeah, that's not that was interesting because he looked a lot like one of the characters from the movie, that Billy Jack Texas, or I don't know. You were talking about how the names are really hard in this movie to know, and that's true. Like the people that aren't the main characters. Also, I thought Party of Five was in this, and it wasn't. It was the guy from Sex and the City.
Aiden.
Yeah, broke up with her. He was a dick. He shot at the guy on the stage. What a dick.
Okay, so then I have written down, crazy Mexican shooting randomly in the street. Then he shot the marshal, who didn't see that coming. I guess this is what happens.
Powers Booth? You thought he was a Mexican?
I thought he was a Mexican. Whoops.
He's not a Mexican, but they do have one Mexican Indian in their crew. But yeah, that's Brocious. And he's the one that actually happened. This is interesting because the guy who was going to play the marshal was, they wanted Glenn Ford, but then he got really sick and he wasn't able to or Robert Mitchum rather, and he got really sick and he wasn't able to do the scene. Mm-hmm. So he just provided the narration, the opening and the end. But he was going to be the sheriff originally, who gets shot. But the guy who ended up being the sheriff is Harry Carey Jr., who has been in a lot of westerns and stuff like that. But apparently in real life, he was shot. He didn't die.
Oh.
And he said it was an accident. The gun went off by accident. That's why they showed it like that in the movie, because it was like, well, how does somebody accidentally shoot a sheriff? Well, that's what he was doing. He was drunk, and I think he was on drugs. He wasn't just drunk. I wrote that down several times. Drugs are bad. That was like a major takeaway I took away from this movie. Like, drugs are bad, okay? Yeah, because he shoots the sheriff.
But was that after
and
he
then
was being...
Wyatt saves him. And that actually happened in real life, too.
Yes.
Wyatt actually did intervene because the town was going to lynch him.
Yes.
Because they liked the sheriff. And they're like, you just shot the sheriff, dickhead. And they're going to hang him. And he's like, no. And remember, he didn't want any part of being law enforcement. So that's interesting to me, because that's really when the shift happens in the movie, where he starts to get involved.
Right. But wasn't this after the guy was being belligerent in the bar and they threw him out of the bar and then he went out and was doing the shooting?
This was after. There's a lot of, and that's a thing with this movie, there's a lot of scenes where there's just a bunch of drunk idiots with guns.
Yes, which is bad.
It's hard to...
Don't drink and shoot, people.
Yeah.
Do your drinking after you shoot.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, after this incident that we just discussed, where the guy shot the marshal and Wyatt Earp intervenes so that they don't lynch the shooter man, all this stuff starts changing in the town. They put up these signs that say you can't carry guns in the town. And then the brothers, and I'm sorry, I think I said there were 2 brothers. There's actually 3 brothers. There's Morgan Earp also.
Mm-hmm.
So there's infighting in
Bill Paxton.
Yes. So there's the 4 core guys. And they're all, like, taking sides. And at this point, I made a prediction that I wrote down. At least one of these guys are going to die. Not including Doc Holliday, who's got TB. I was referring to him as TB Man.
TB Man.
So one of the 3 Earps are going to die. That was my prediction.
I hope he doesn't haunt us on Halloween. Call him
Val
TB
Kilmer's
Man.
still alive.
I mean, the actual Doc Holliday.
Oh, sorry, Doc Holliday. Rest in peace. So I wrote Mustache, Colt and Rooster's daddy, is unhappy that he can't carry guns in the town.
Colt and Rooster's daddy?
Yeah, from the ranch.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Virgil Earp.
Yeah. He's not upset about the guns thing. He's the one posting the guns sign.
I wrote down that he's unhappy.
Well, he said that I'm not...
Can't carry guns in town.
Yeah, he says that you can't.
That's my note.
He posts it up on the... He's the marshal. And that's accurate. That in real life, Virgil and Morgan were the marshals in the town, and they put up that ordinance. I don't know if it was in relation to the sheriff being shot or not, but they did put up that ordinance, and I looked it up. Apparently it was like, if you came into town, there was a livery stable kind of place where you had to like stow your guns until you left the town. So like you couldn't carry the guns in the city limits.
So you had to check them.
So what would happen is like if you first, and they said they had an exception for people that like just showed up and had no clue, and you know it's kind of like, oh, I didn't know that, or they give you kind of like, it wasn't like it was a misdemeanor kind of thing. It wasn't like a felony or anything like that, but it was frowned upon. And if somebody said, hey, you need to disarm, then you did it without hesitation kind of thing. So it's interesting.
Okay, so then I have that drunkie. I'm guessing that refers to the shooter that shot the marshal.
Yeah.
And his gang are going to attack them per their warning. And I thought that it was really nice that they gave them notice.
Bad guys do that a lot more than you think.
Yeah.
They really do in real life too, which isn't real bright.
And so much for Wyatt Earp not getting involved.
Yeah, he says you gotta back your brother's play. Wyatt has really only been in one gunfight his whole career. That's what he's talking about. He's like, you know, everybody thinks I'm this badass, but I've really only ever been in one gunfight in my entire life.
Yeah.
I mean, he came out on the winning end, obviously.
So there was a shootout, which would be the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral. And now everyone in the town is mad at them. And that's where I rolled my eyes. And Jason Priestley got really whiny. Jason Priestley's character, sorry. He got really whiny at them. He was like, "Urgh!"
Yeah, because there was sympathy for the Cowboys after the shooting because...
They were the bad guys.
Well, because it was so one-sided. Because the other guy... I actually read this. At the gunfight, Virgil... I think it was Virgil. He said that I saw Billy Clanton pulling his gun, but I knew that Fred... Whatever the other guy, I can't think of his name now. I knew he was a much better shot, so I shot him. And Billy Clanton actually got a couple shots off and never hit anybody. So, in other words, the Earps were much better marksmen.
Yes.
That is why this is such a, and also Doc Holliday. That's why this is such a fabled event in the American West, because there were 30 shots fired, people were 6 feet apart, and one side just slaughtered the other. The other side basically were ineffective morons.
Right.
And even one of them was like, and this actually happened. I was like, that didn't really happen. Ike Clanton, the guy who started all the shit, all the talking, he actually fell to his knees and hugged on Wyatt Earp and said, I don't have any guns or whatever. And he's like, well, then get out of here, because that's what we're doing here.
Right.
I don't remember the actual line, but you can look it up. But that's where, this is where he says, you're a daisy if you do.
Right.
Which a lot of people are like, well, I don't understand that line. I have a theory about that line.
I don't understand it either.
I believe.
Oh, pushing daisies.
I believe it's a double meaning. Okay? You're a daisy if you do means, well, you'd have to be one lucky son of a bitch to pull that off.
Right.
Which apparently he actually said this. He actually said, you're a daisy if you do. He says, I got you now, Doc. Or I got you now, Holiday. And he said, you're a daisy if you do. People, like, witnesses heard him say that. So I think it's like he was saying, you're one lucky son of a bitch, but also you'll be dead because you'll be pushing up daisies.
Right.
So that's my theory about that line. It's pretty. It doesn't really matter because I knew instantly what he meant. He's like, you think you got me, but you're wrong, because he has a shotgun, which he had in real life. Yeah, it's interesting because I wrote the Star Trek episode. For me, the first exposure I ever had to the gunfight at the OK Corral is this weird Star Trek episode where this alien takes all of it takes the crew, and it puts them in this scenario where they are having to reenact the gunfight at the OK Corral. And it's really weird. And I'm like, what in the hell? I was a little kid and I was watching this, and that was the first time I ever heard of the gunfight at the OK Corral. So, but anyway, yeah. So he says, you're a daisy if you do. There's a line where he says to the mayor, I guess we did our good deed for today, mayor. Which is kind of interesting because it was like the mayor was kind of guilting them into being law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I looked more into how the actual gunfight went down, and it was pretty similar, except that there was a span of about 2 hours after he pistol whips the one guy, because he goes down there to he was talking, running his mouth, so he pistol whips the one guy, and I guess the sheriff, the fake sheriff, the county sheriff, that, you know, dandy pansy guy, he told them in real life, oh yeah, I disarmed them. So they were like walking down there. I didn't get too much in the detail, but they were walking down there with under the assumption that the Clantons were disarmed. When they got there, Virgil instantly realized, oh shit, they're not disarmed. And then he says, all right, throw up your arms and turn over your weapons. And then that's when the guy pulls out his gun instead, and he's like, I don't want that. And then that's when the fight happened. So then I say third act time, because I know what's coming up. We always say this thing because we watch the Goldbergs, and there's a thing where he says, in the third act, laughs are optional. So every time you get to the third act, something sad is about to happen. So after the gunfight, you know things are going to be escalated, and they're gonna retaliate on the Earps. So you pretty much knew that too, I'm sure. Like you said, you knew that one of the brothers was gonna die.
At least one of them.
At least one of them. And then they show the scene with the tarot cards, where they're reading the tarot cards.
So then it was a dark and stormy night, and the thunder rolled, and then they got attacked.
Yeah, Virgil gets maimed. He loses the use of his arm for the rest of his life.
Yes.
That's historically accurate.
And one guy died.
And Morgan dies. That actually happened a few weeks afterwards in real life, but obviously they didn't. There was a lot of moments in the movie where time passes very rapidly in the real lineage of events, but they obviously kind of speed it up for the sake of the movie to keep things moving. But yeah, he's shot in the back. Morgan is shot in the back through a window while he's playing pool.
Yeah, and Wyatt Earp tries to save him, but he can't save him.
There's blood everywhere. It's a really graphic scene, actually. It's really, I enjoy the scene because it's so physically, like, you really feel the gore and death and the sadness. And he even says, You know, you can't see a damn thing, because he said that, you know, when you die, everybody tells you you're going to see a light and you're going to see this and you see all, and he's like, you don't see anything. And then he dies. And then the really bad scene comes up where the big meme that I use all the time with Powers Booth, where it looks like Wyatt and his family are leaving town.
Yeah, and I don't blame him, because I would leave too, because the people in this town are a bunch of ungrateful assholes.
Yeah, they kind of are. Yeah, you mentioned that. I remember while we were watching it. You said, what a bunch of assholes. I would have left them a long time ago. They don't deserve my, sacrifice.
Yes. So then Wyatt Earp says something about bringing the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and raining holy hellfire on the cowboys or something along those lines.
Yeah. He says, you tell them I'm coming and hell's coming with me.
Yeah, something like that. So then they go around and they start killing the other guys. That part was kind of confusing to me, because they didn't really leave, and then they were just going around just shooting the other guys.
Well, it's interesting because there's actual accounts of that battle at the creek that took place, and I was like, this is such Hollywood bullshit. But then I looked it up, and apparently one of the guys who was shot in the stomach by the Earps gave an account of exactly that. He said Wyatt Earp just basically stood up as all these bullets were flying by him, and he walked right up to the guy and just shot him at point blank range and killed him. And the guy was like, I couldn't believe it either, and then he died. I mean, so it was an account from somebody who had nothing to gain by saying that story. So what I told you, I want to talk real quick about this movie called Sunset that came out in 1988 with Bruce Willis and James Garner. Bruce Willis plays Tom Mix. Now, if you remember, at the very end of this movie, they say, Tom Mix wept. That's the final line of the movie. And you're probably like, I don't know what the hell that means.
I don't remember that.
Well, Tom Mix was this big actor in the 20s in Hollywood. And in the movie Sunset, James Garner plays Wyatt Earp. And they go, it's a really good movie, actually. Malcolm McDowell's in it. One of the things that you learn about Wyatt Earp is that he was not the fastest gun by any means. But you could pull your gun and shoot like 3 or 4 shots and not hit him, because he was just calm as shit, and he would just take his time and he would aim right in on you and kill you with like one shot, like that, like a total badass. Like that, I think that's why he's such a legend to me, is because kind of like in Pulp Fiction when the guys are shooting the guns and they're like, Jesus, nobody hit anybody. It's kind of like that. It's like that's the way Wyatt Earp was. He was just like stoic, unafraid, unwavering, cold as ice, and did what he had to do to survive.
Yeah, so then I wrote down, what happened to Long Curls? How could he go with this floozy? I was very dissatisfied because he ended up with the floozy slutty lady. But then they said that Long Curls died because of her drugs. So then I guess it was okay that he was with floozy lady. He seemed to be pretty happy with her, and then they were in the snow, and they were dancing around in the snow, and they seemed to be pretty happy. So then my dissatisfied turned into an, okay, then never mind.
Yeah. So Charlton Heston is in this movie, which is awesome. He plays Hooker, who's this guy who lets them kind of like hole up while they're going after the cowboys. There's this vendetta posse that's been set up that when they're going after the cowboys, and then the cowboys have some people on their side. The guy Jason Priestley plays is actually the historian that people are now saying was the most accurate descriptor of what Wyatt Earp was really like, which is basically what they portray in Tombstone. Because there was all these legends about how Wyatt Earp was like this kind, gentle lawman, blah blah. Well, Jason Priestley's character in real life wrote a book about how, no, he was a pimp, he was a gambler, he was a thief, he was a murderer, he was all these things, and they were like, no, we don't believe you. And then they did more and more research, and they were like, shit, it looks like that's what he was.
Whoops.
I mean, nobody's a saint, especially back then. If you were out in the Wild West, it was called the Wild West for a reason. It was wild, and you had to be kind of a hard ass to survive out there. You just had to. There's a big confrontation with Johnny Ringo, which is interesting because Johnny Ringo calls out Wyatt Earp and says, just you and me, Earp, we're gonna settle this once and for all. He wants basically revenge for what happened to Brocious, to Powers Booth. And Johnny Ringo is played by Michael Biehn, by the way, and I think he does a fantastic job in this movie. He's been in a lot of movies with Bill Paxton. I guess he was like in 5 movies with Bill Paxton and James Cameron or something like that. He was in Aliens. He was in he was in Aliens.
Aliens, yes.
With Bill Paxton. He was in Terminator with James Cameron. But Michael Biehn's been in a lot of stuff. He was in Navy SEALs. He's one of my favorite actors, actually. When I was a kid, I always wanted to be like Michael Biehn. He was just the quintessential badass. And when I saw him as Johnny Ringo, I was like, I still kind of liked him, even though he was just a mean son of a bitch. He was a total bad guy. But what I liked about him is that he was, like he says, when Doc Holliday finally confronts him, he says, "Poor soul, you're just high strung." He's like, you're just. Like he said, what makes a man like Johnny Ringo? And he's like, some people just are born to watch the world die. He says being born is like, what is he seeking revenge for? And he says, for being born. That's what he says. So it's kind of like, he's just a bad guy. Like he's just an evil bastard. And I say, I don't care if it's historically accurate. It's just great. This movie is just great. And even if there are some moments that are very historically accurate, but then there's also some moments that you're like, well, give or take a lie or two, which is a line they say a lot in Sunset, by the way.
So overall, I think that this was better than I thought it would be. It wasn't terrible. I didn't fall asleep.
No, you didn't. No, you never fall asleep, though. Yeah, you take this seriously, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
And do you think that you're happy with this pick then?
Yes, I definitely am happier with this pick over other picks.
Yeah. Now I want to talk about the On This Day in History. This movie actually came out.
I thought you've been talking about that this whole time. You've been talking about history this whole time.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing we do. We do our bits. We do.
Okay.
On This Day in History, like when the movie came out. This movie actually came out December 25th, 1993.
That's Christmas.
That is Christmas. So I was looking really hard for something that would tie into this movie. And I'm like, well, I could just say, well, it's Christmas. You can use your imagination. A lot of crap happened on Christmas. But I decided I wouldn't be lazy. I would actually try to find something. So what else happened on Christmas Day? Washington crossed the Delaware during the Revolutionary War. The reason I thought that this was apropos is because it kind of shows the brass nuts on both Washington and Wyatt Earp when Wyatt is at the creek and he's fighting Brocious, and he basically just stands up and walks through all those bullets, and it's kind of like the bravado of Washington. I think maybe that's why people respect both of these figures so much, is because they were unafraid pioneers. They were unafraid people that were willing to do things that other people wouldn't do. And I know Washington, obviously I'm a giant George Washington fan, so the guy was definitely not a pansy.
Nope.
And that brings us to our secret word. I think you almost got me beat this time, which is rare, because our secret word was pansy. Pansy is now a word, apparently, that, according to dictionary.com, is extremely offensive to the homosexual community. It's a very homophobic term.
I thought it was a flower.
It is a flower. So is a daisy.
Yeah. Is daisy offensive too?
I'm sure everything is offensive these days. But it was so offensive that I said it to Dan Rather, and Twitter canceled my account of 10 years. They suspended permanently my account of 10 years because I called Dan Rather a pansy. So score one for the social justice warriors. They got their censorship, and they managed to get rid of Rick Swift on Twitter. Congratulations, you fucking cocksucking pansy losers. Anyway, you know who wouldn't stand for that? Wyatt Earp. Anyway, so that's Tombstone as we see it. Obviously, I love this movie. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. It is one of the most quoted movies in the United States Marine Corps. There's just, I can't even tell you how many, when I was in, we didn't have memes and social media and stuff like that, but we're definitely catching up now. I've seen tons and tons and tons of them. There's tons of shirts out there with, Doc Holliday, I'm your Huckleberry. And there's a lot of talk about this Huckleberry line, if he actually said Huckleberry or Hucklebearer, which a huckle is a kind of flower that you bear when you bury somebody. But I'm your Huckleberry is also like saying, I'm your man. Like, I'm the guy. I'm the one that's going to do it. Like, he ends up being the one that kills Johnny Ringo.
Spoiler.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm not even worrying about spoilers. This movie came out in 1993. But in real life,
So somebody could have not seen it yet.
oh well. In real life, Johnny Ringo committed suicide, or at least that's the official story.
Aww.
But there's speculation that other people might have been involved, but I don't know if they would go through all that trouble.
It's not a suicide then.
Yeah, it's not like he's Epstein, you know. It's
I
like,
was gonna say, if somebody kills you, it's not a suicide.
well, it depends on who kills
it's a
you.
Murder.
Depends on who kills you. Somebody well-connected kills you and they make it look like a suicide, then people say it's a suicide, then guess what? It's a suicide. But yeah, Johnny Ringo, he looks like he got thrown from his horse and he lost his boots or something, and like then
Weird.
yeah. And then he was found propped up against a tree and his head was blown off and his hand was like holding there was like just one finger on the trigger and his the revolver was hanging down by his hand. So people ruled it a suicide. But when we're talking back in the 1880s, it wasn't like they were doing forensic science and stuff like that. They were like, yep, looks like the guy killed himself. So, I mean, would you go through all that trouble if you were like Doc Holliday or any of these other guys back in
No.
the Old West? You'd just shoot the motherfucker. You'd be just like, you'd shoot him and leave him there, and you wouldn't make it
You'd be
look like a
done.
suicide. So I think it was probably a suicide. I hate to, ruin the legend or whatever, but you don't go through that much trouble. Also, Doc Holliday was hundreds of miles away when the shooting happened.
He took off his boots so they wouldn't get blood and brains on them.
Yeah, right. Oh, speaking of boots, were you wondering why he said at the end his final line when he's in the deathbed in the hospital?
Take my boots.
No,
Bury me with my boots.
he says, "Well, I'll be damned," or something like that, or he
No.
looks down and he says, "Well, how about that?" or whatever the hell he says.
I don't remember.
That's what it is. He's talking about how he thought he'd die with his boots on. And
Like fighting.
Right, he always thought that like moving to the west and everything with his tuberculosis, that wouldn't be what got him. He'd be in a gambling thing where it would go
or
wrong.
a Latin word off.
Just anything. Yeah, a Latin word off. Yeah, exactly. Something other than tuberculosis, but he didn't die with his boots on like he wanted to. But that was that's a really touching scene for me as a guy. I don't know, maybe it didn't touch you as a girl, but like it's a guy thing. It's like a bromance kind of thing. Like he's saying goodbye to his best friend. It's tough.
That was
I like
sad.
that line where he's like, "Well, I got a lot of friends," and then Doc Holliday says, "Well, I don't."
Aww.
Like that's like his only friend is Wyatt, you know.
Yeah,
I might
that's
not be a smart man, but I know that good old a friend like that doesn't come along but once in a lifetime. That kind of thing. Yeah, so obviously I love this movie. I will talk about it forever. What's odd is I don't own this movie, and they end up buying it or renting it so we could watch it for the podcast, and then the day after, it becomes available for free on
some movie channel.
on one of them. Then I was like, son of a bitch. All right, so that has been Tombstone, and now we will give you a hint about Madison's she-pick.
It was set in the 80s, but it wasn't made in the 80s.
Oh God, set in the 80s. I don't know what it is, folks. So it's set in the 80s, not made in the 80s. You got to give me a little more than that.
And this movie title is also the title of a song.
Oh no, I hope it's not what I'm thinking it is.
What is that?
Well, if I say it, then the people are gonna know.
Oh, well, tell me offline.
I'll tell you afterwards. Yeah. We hope that you enjoyed our little he pick for Film Grouch, the Film Grouch show. Definitely
On Halloween.
Yeah, on Halloween. Make sure you go ahead and check out filmgrouch.com. I just got a new theme that I just bought where I'll be updating the site, so you might see some changes going on there, hopefully for the better. We just joined Podchaser. So if you go to podchaser.com, it's kind of like the IMDb of podcasts, and I'm really excited about being on there because they catalog everybody's performances, and they really make it easy to like and subscribe and comment, and it is one of the best places that I've seen on the internet for people that are interested in podcasting. And so if you're listening to this, I'm assuming you're obviously interested in podcasting. So you can follow me on Twitter at FilmGrouch. You can no longer follow Rick Swift on Twitter because he dead. You can follow Madison on Twitter at Movie Princess. You can follow me also on Instagram at FilmGrouch. And like I said, we just got back from our our Palm Springs, California trip, where we were out there for Tango Down, which is a short film that I co-wrote and produced, and I had the honor of working with a ton of veterans on. Very proud of the work that we did there, and I'd like to thank anybody that's listening to this who was there that night. Thank you very much for your support and for your kindness and just overall being there. So I guess maybe we'll give you another hint after I talk to Madison offline and see what her she pick is going to be. But the next one will be a she pick, and we hope that you will give us another listen. And hopefully Madison will give me a movie that doesn't make me hate movies.
Okay, bye.
All right, thanks everyone, and remember, I'm your Huckleberry.